Alright, what's going on, guys? People are getting so mad about Elden Ring, which is kind of a pretty common thing nowadays. Elden Ring is such a break from normal video gaming tropes, and you'd think by now people would learn. But with its meteoric rise and success, people just can't understand it. I'm sure we all remember after the release of Elden Ring, those developers that came out talking about how terrible the game's UI was and how un-user-friendly the quest design was. Well, we kinda have a similar situation on our hands. Recently, pretty much all the conversation in the gaming sphere has been on the upcoming Game Awards. And of course, Elden Ring is a nominee for Game of the Year. Well, in light of that, all the other nominees for other categories at the Game Awards have also been revealed, and Elden Ring is nominated for 7 total categories, those of which are Game of the Year, Best RPG, Best Art Direction, Best Game Direction, Best Score and Music, Best Sound Design, and the one that has a lot of people up in arms, Best Narrative. And that's what we're gonna break down. But as we get into it today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date on all the Elden Ring coverage. I'm making it my goal to try to get to 70k before the Game Awards, because there's a big chance Elden Ring DLC is going to be announced there. And of course, I'm gonna try to stay on top of that for you guys. But now let's get into it. Some of y'all might remember a little bit of drama I had back in the day over whether or not Elden Ring's storytelling is good or bad. And it's kind of that same argument that's popped up again, because people can't seem to understand why Elden Ring would be nominated for Best Narrative when the story is so convoluted and hard to understand, especially when compared to other games like God of War Ragnarok, which has a story that anybody who picks up the controller and plays the game is going to understand and comprehend on their first playthrough. Elden Ring does not follow that route whatsoever. The primary story of Elden Ring is told in obscurity. Your character is dropped off in this dead and decaying world and only given the scraps of what happened, and it's part of your job as a player of the game to seek out more fragments of what happened through the tales of other characters and item descriptions of the things you pick up in the world. And that's how the game treats you, the player, and the characters that inhabit that world. You only know what your player character would know, and considering you're an undead that just came back to life in this state of the world, they're not gonna know very much. And this is where people get lost, because the game never actually tells you that. So an unsuspecting player who is unfamiliar with the way these games work would rightfully feel confused. And so the question surrounding all of this becomes, is a story that's not told to you directly still a narrative? Let's look at the definition of narrative. Narrative is defined as a spoken or written account of connected events, a story. And there's an important part in there, spoken or written. And as I mentioned earlier, the majority of Elden Ring's lore is told through the item descriptions and tiny bits of text we can pick up throughout the game. And on top of that, the environmental storytelling is top notch. Everything in this game is placed the way it is for a reason, and every character you meet is going to give you some bit of exposition to a degree. But even if you don't want to take the time to decipher all of that, the game still gives you a clear objective. The cutscenes, though few and far between, paint a good picture of what the background of the world is. However, according to the definition of narrative, it encompasses everything. So if we take the story of Elden Ring with every one of its pieces in place, there's a narrative here, and a very strong one at that. And if you consider all of FromSoftware's past titles, I think Elden Ring does a fantastic job at integrating both story and gameplay in a way that newer players can understand in a hands-off approach. And it's through this understanding that I'm going to approach all these criticisms of the game being nominated for Best Narrative, because I strongly believe that when we break all of this down, almost none of them hold water. And I'll explain. In fairness, when From hides the story of their game behind literally hundreds of secrets and item descriptions that most will never see, it's harder to catch that they didn't bother to include a few chapters worth of key story beats. While I can definitely understand how people come to this conclusion, that the game somehow leaves out key details, I simply don't think it's true. The intro cutscene does do a good job at painting the picture of what happened, but the things that it leaves out are questions that the player would naturally have when they're exploring the world. For example, probably the first question on everybody's mind when they watch the intro cutscene is, what actually is the Elden Ring? Now, if you're somebody that played through the game, took the time to read the item descriptions, you would realize that the true nature of the Elden Ring is one of the biggest twists in the story. The characters that inhabit the world think they know what the Elden Ring is, but in actuality, nobody does. It's a fundamental player in the story that is left out of context for a reason. And once again, that's a common practice for FromSoftware games. The stories are built on fragmentation. They want you to ask more questions than you get answered. Now, of course, that may not be everybody's cup of tea. I can understand that that type of storytelling isn't for everyone. However, that's very much still a strong narrative in its own right. Now, the initial poster of a tweet said, nah, narratives are more than what you're being walked through. It's also lore and world building, and Elden Ring has tons of it. Now, people not not wanting to look into it, that much is fair. Some people want to be walked through it, but to say it's a farce is disingenuous in my opinion. Now, as we just explained, they're exactly right. Narrative encompasses everything. But the reply to this tweet shows the flaw in these people's arguments. None of that is narrative. Narrative, especially how the story is told. Something Elden Ring doesn't do is tell you a story. This isn't best lore, world building, or story, it's best narrative. Now, aside from that statement just being blatantly false, it illustrates a big problem in the gaming industry as a whole, that the line between cinema and game is growing ever thinner. To go back to my point about God of War, part of the reason I personally did not enjoy that game near as much as Elden Ring is because it is a very strong guided experience. The game wants the player to do one thing and go about their journey in one way, so that the player gets the story the first time and eliminates the chance that they don't. When you have a game that implements this style of storytelling, naturally it's going to cater to a wider audience because it's more accessible. It's easier to chew. However, one of the drawbacks of this is that it has to remove control from the player, and the most common form of this is through cutscenes. Now, they can disguise it with QuickTime events, but at the end of the day, it becomes more of a movie than a game. And after all, these are the Game Awards. When you pick up Elden Ring and play through the game, there are very few times it ever takes control away from the player. This is a game that focuses on freedom and the player's exploration. It wants you to get as much of the story as you choose to find, and that amount is completely subjective to the work the player puts in to discover it. If a player does not get the story out of this game, it's because of their own choices. That's not a fault of the game. Again, you may not like it, but that's still just as strong of a narrative point as a game that forces you to be told its story. Except if I have to search a YouTube video every time to understand every single thing is not little effort. Not only this, many things in the game you have to search some sort of guide or YouTube video. What's the point of the game then? That's bad design. Now, this is a point that we've gone over so many times, and I've made several videos breaking down exactly why this isn't true. I really can't stand the mindset that you have to watch YouTube videos in order to find something or understand something in this game. You don't. The fact that the videos exist in the first place proves them wrong, because somebody originally had to find that information in the game in order to make the video. As I stated before, what you find and what you understand is directly correlated to the work you put in to achieve it. Now, if you want to talk about the quest design, yes, there are story elements to be gained by doing NPC quests, but as I stated earlier, this is a game that has a lot of player choice. It's impossible to do every quest in one playthrough. There are 6 different endings that all depend on the choices that you make as a player in your journey. Just because you feel entitled that you should be able to get everything out of it in one journey does not make the design bad. So I think the way to kind of address all this outrage is summed up very well in a tweet that Sekiro Doobie posted that I really liked. Elden Ring dares to trust its own players. Also, another thing that terrifies people from Elden Ring is you can make your own narrative. There's no hand-holding. It's not clear who's good or bad, who's the hero, and there's a non-zero chance that your conclusions might be wrong. And I think that's absolutely correct. Although there is a definite story to this game, I think it's a very telling sign that a narrative is strong if it still leaves room for the personal interpretation of its player. Not knowing what's good or bad or who's right or wrong is a theme that the game drives home, and something that I believe should be rewarded is a game that manages to show more by telling less. And I believe that's Elden Ring's greatest strength when it comes to its narrative. And because of that, it absolutely deserves to be one of the nominees. But to close out my thoughts on this, if you've been around on the Souls games for a while, this is a topic that continues to come up every time a new game is released. And not once has it ever actually stood. It's an argument that's fundamentally built from either laziness or ignorance, and that might sound kind of harsh, but it's true. Just because a story is not instantly digestible does not mean it doesn't exist or it is bad. Sometimes the stories that take longer to process end up having a much more longer lasting impact, and the story of Elden Ring is a perfect example of that. But anyways guys, that's gonna pretty much do it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to leave a like on it. Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you're new around here. And just as a reminder, I will be streaming the Game Awards on December 8th. There's a very good chance we're gonna get the Elden Ring DLC trailer then, so you'll definitely want to tune in for that. But with all that, I'll catch you in the next one.